Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. My name is Timothy Langley. Today is September 18th, 2015. You are watching episode 26 of Tokyo on Fire. Today's burning issue is diet legislation on the security bills. That bill is being punched through the diet proceedings right now as we are recording and is likely to become law today. We love receiving your comments and having you participate in this discussion. You can contribute to our discussion by posting your comments at tokyoonfire.com. We are also available on Twitter at hashtag TokyoOnFire. Alternatively, you can post your comments directly into the dialog box on YouTube. Finally, our podcast is available on iTunes. My guest and co-conspirator today is Michael Chuchek. Michael Chuchek is the author of the well-known blog Shisaku. It is the foremost blog on Japanese politics. You can read about Michael's views on a wide variety of issues on Shisaku. Michael is adjunct fellow at Temple University, and he is also the adjunct professor at Sophia University and at Waseda University, where he's teaching budding young minds about politics and international diplomacy. Welcome back, Michael.
Good to be back.
Last week, our burning issue was the My Number system. We got a lot of good hits and good comments on that subject last week. It's really a big issue. This week, we're talking about the diet legislation, which is being fought about right now.
It's really two very, very different things. With the My Number, we have something that's just basically bureaucratic that people don't really know a lot about and see as very fearful. And then right now, in terms of this particular piece of legislation, it's been talked about a lot, and people have been talking about it in public and arguing about and protesting in a way that most Japanese legislation just doesn't get considered like this.
My Number is a bill that went through both houses of the Diet and it became a law.
Yeah.
Right now, the security legislation, it has passed the lower house. It is now in consideration at the upper house. Basically, the consideration has been finished. They're now putting it up for a vote. It is causing a lot of protests.
Well, it's really, as we are recording these words right now, they're going through the process of getting this bill passed. It's not passed yet, at least last time we looked at any kind of communications, any social media, but it's going to happen today. Now, this bill has been in consideration for a very, very long time, many, many hours in committee. It passed through the committee, however, forcibly. It was not a smooth, and it was certainly not a clean process, and newspapers all over the world showed images of the members of the DPJ and other members of the opposition parties rushing the podium and a free-for-all breaking loose when the committee chairman said, that's it, this bill is going to a vote, and they just went bananas.
Well, we knew that this was going to happen. I mean, it was kind of brinksmanship. The upper house is not quite controlled and dominated by the LDP. It needs its coalition partner to be able to manipulate and push these bills through the process. It's not a clean and guaranteed process as it is in the lower house.
Well, they don't have complete control over all the committees, but they do together have a majority. But in terms of the committee, what was done was that the chairman promised all the parties that there would be a certain number of hours.
About 100, I guess.
Yes, right. There would be a fixed number of hours that there would be debate on the bill.
Before it came up to vote.
Before it would come up to a vote. Now, during this long extended, and it's the longest extension in history, this long extended session of the Diet, the opposition parties employed delaying tactics, and there were many, many of the committee meetings that were simply canceled because there was no way to bring the opposition parties in. They had some kind of objection. They wouldn't cooperate in any way. So that the calendar made it impossible to get in that fixed number of hours before the Diet session itself expires.
Right.
So the committee chairman said, well, okay, we've done the best we can. Time to go to a vote.
Okay. Without getting into a lot of navel-gazing and a lot of the details, it's kind of important to talk about why it's in the upper house right now. So for a bill to become law, it needs to be passed by the lower house, and it needs to be passed by the upper house, or vice versa.
No, it has to be passed by the lower house. And then a clock starts, the 60-day clock. Now, if the House of Councilors rejects the bill, it can still go back down to the House of Representatives, where it's revived, and if the ruling coalition has a 2/3 majority, which the ruling coalition does, they can override the decision. Also, a possibility is that the upper house takes no action. It gets stuck. It is not able to take action. The 60-day rule still applies. Right. After 60 days, the lower house can re-vote and the thing becomes law. And that's one of the backstops to all of this. So not only do the coalitions have majorities in both houses, but if anything happened in the upper house, there was easily the thing would be kicked back to the lower house.
Okay, and this probably explains why the Prime Minister, when he went to Washington, D.C., and he spoke with both houses of the Congress, he said with a high degree of confidence, this will be passed, this will become law.
Yeah, because this was, what people have to understand is, even though there are all these obligations, the obligations are perfunctory. They have majorities in both houses. If they really wanted to push the calendar and say, to heck with you, to the opposition, they can. There's nothing to stop them because they have absolute control.
Right.
So this has been both a courtesy and sort of a social duty.
Right. And the chairman of the committee is basically, he's kind of buying the favor of the opposition, and he's trying to calm down the forcefulness of the majority party. And he's made certain promises. He's actually said, I'll give you 100 hours of debate, and we can debate this before I call it to a vote. And he holds that unitary power, that unilateral power.
He holds that power, but he also usually holds to the promise.
Right.
But here, because of the delaying tactics of the opposition, there was no way that he could keep that promise before the Diet session ran out. And this particular extended session got messed up by the fact that we have a new national set of holidays, which is Silver Week, which happens next week, which is it
happens right after this. We finish taping this episode.
It starts the next day, and what happens is that in normal counting, they looked at the days and they said, "Aha, we'll be able to make it." Then they realized that these would all be national holidays, and they weren't going to have the time, and the opposition, of course, was absolutely happy with that. So it's sort of a play. It's sort of a show that's being put on with both sides are good guys and bad guys in this. The LDP and its coalition partner Komeito have been good guys in that they said, okay, let's at least debate it.
Right.
We have all the votes. We could tell you to just go to heck, and we just voted into law, but they didn't. They put on this, you may call it a show, but it certainly has cost the cabinet and the prime minister a great deal of support and a great deal of their personal capital, their political capital. So it's a very costly show to put on.
Right.
But they put it on. And they, in fact, extended the Diet in a historically long 95 extra days. But at some point, they have to get to a vote. And the opposition, yes, they're trying to fight, in their view, for the retention and the salvation of the Constitution that was established in 1946. But their tactics were going to go against the country's ability to function as a representative democracy. They were basically trying to short-circuit the ability of a majority, and on a thumping majority, in the House of Reps and the House of Councilors to do the job.
Right. Let's talk about that part a little bit later, but right now let's talk about the dynamics and the drama that we witnessed last night and what's going on right now. So if people are, and I watched TV, I'm sure you did last night, and watched the ongoing shenanigans, they might come to the wrong conclusion. I mean, perhaps foreign viewers might look at what's going on in Diet proceedings, for example, last night, and say, wow, that looks like what goes on in Taiwan. And in Taiwan, it's really rough. I mean, people throw punches and chairs are thrown and that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, there's a particular image of that last night's debate, which has a clenched fist against a person's face.
Yes.
And the clenched fist is by a former Ground Self-Defense Forces colonel, which makes it all the better for
with the ruling party.
With the ruling party,
Right.
and he's got his fist to the face of a member of the DPJ.
Right.
It was not a punch thrown.
Right.
It was just they came together, and instead of having his hand open, he had his hand in a fist, which is probably good because you can really hurt somebody with your fingers. But it was broadcast all over the world.
It makes good drama, doesn't it?
Oh, it looks great.
It looks great. But that's what I wanted to talk about, that this drama, this kabuki that's going on. I mean, when they rushed the podium and they tried to grab the microphone and tried to protect the committee chairman, I mean, this is all a well-practiced art. Everybody that was participating in that had nice suits on, and after the fray, everybody had nice suits on.
I don't know. There's a certain honesty to it, and yes, it's also, again, a performance for television. But nevertheless, it's pretty intense, and there is a possibility of people getting injured because sometimes they really are doing the dive like a mosh pit at a concert. Just wow!
No, you could see that. Right?
They do that. They have a certain degree of confidence that people won't suddenly part and let them fall to the ground. But the issue is that the vehemence and the energy of the DPJ and the opposition parties would probably not exist if it were not the fact that outside the dais, all these weeks and months, there have been organized and well-attended protests.
Thousands of people. This hasn't happened, Michael, for 40 years? I mean, there hasn't been this much public outcry and this massive collective energy directed at the parliament since 1960.
We're watching history being made. It's really been incredibly well organized. It started out kind of vague, and it's so extraordinarily different from the disorganized and, frankly, I'm not say boring, but simply not engaging protests against nuclear power.
Right.
Those went on for a very, very long time, but they looked disorganized. They did not have a message, or they did not have a message. These things have been very pungent,
right.
And let's give the organizers credit. They've worked out the fact that they first of all have to put students at the front, and students as the vanguards of, guardians of the future, people whose futures will be affected by all of this, especially people who could be. There was even a time when they were in the Diet talking about, are you going to revive the draft? And the LDP said, what? Why are you doing this? Well, it makes a lot of sense when you think that the students were the people outside.
Right.
And they're very photogenic. They made a very careful choice of some very good-looking persons to be the spokes, man and woman, for this group.
Right.
And they look good on camera. They speak well. It's been a completely different environment.
Right.
And that really has been one of the two things that emboldened the opposition to really try to fight this one.
Sure. Well, that was exactly my point, that it is a dramatic display for other purposes besides we're doing this because we think we can turn the tide. They can't turn the tide.
They can't turn the tide, no.
But it's a drama for showing the people who are outside and also people who are going to be voting in the next upper house election, which will include a lot of these kids outside who are now going to have that ability to vote. So it really is a confluence of terrific forces that have been separately topics of Tokyo on Fire. We've talked about the law that allows people 18 and 19 years old to vote for the first time, as well as the dynamics between the Komeito and the LDP and what the Komeito stands for.
Yeah, this is all very, very carefully done, I must say. And I was going to say what the other big trigger to this was the LDP's boneheaded invitation of a law professor to a committee without vetting what his opinions were. And then when the committee asked, well, is this new legislation constitutional? He said, well, you have to say, based on precedent and blah, 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 blah. No.
Right.
That let loose
That was a
the
mistake.
floodgate. It was not a mistake. It was catastrophic. It completely undermined everything. It was just one man's opinion. And he wasn't a member of the Diet, and he was just called in as an expert witness. But suddenly, what was moribund and, there's no hope, we just have to let it happen and we'll see what goes.
Well, isn't that...
It was completely reversed by that one person's saying no.
Well, isn't that kind of a recurring theme with the LDP, that frequently they get caught in the arrogance of power? They know they have the votes. They know they have, the sway of political power, and they get a little bit lazy. They get a little bit complacent. They get a little bit pushy, and that's really what turns voters off. We'll
see how this happens in terms of this one bill has had numerous instances of this arrogance of power getting in the way. We had the incredible, it's not incredible when you think about his thinking, but incredible blunder by advisor to the Prime Minister, Isozaki, when he spoke what he was thinking rather than what he was supposed to say. And what he was thinking was, who cares if the law is constitutional or not? That's not what's important. What's important is whether it helps Japan's defense. And he said it in public and said it out loud. You don't even say it in private because it might be reported in the newspapers. Oh, it was a disaster. And he had to actually, and he wasn't even in Diet testimony, he was outside, but he had to go into the Diet and personally retract his own words because he spoke his thoughts, and there's definitely the thoughts of the Prime Minister as well.
Okay, even though the bill is now, we don't know where it is now.
Well, it's a law. By the time people who watch this, when this is loaded up, it will be a law.
Okay. Right now, there's a couple of considerations for a no confidence motion, no confidence against the Prime Minister, against the chairman of the committee, this and that. It's just, once again, several tactics to delay the vote. The vote will probably happen today.
But there are the tactics to delay the vote, and the vote would have been at 10 o'clock this morning, but they submitted a no confidence, the opposition, I should say, not they, the opposition submitted a no confidence vote against first the Speaker of the House. When that failed, they went to a no confidence motion on Prime Minister Abe himself. And that's delaying tactics. But what they did last night at this morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, was they submitted a no confidence motion against the Minister of Defense. That was the first one that they did. And that was, what that means is, and that has a really deep meaning, is that Prime Minister, that Minister Nakatani, the defense minister, is gone. The tradition is, if you are the target of a no confidence motion, well, in this case, it's not a no confidence motion, it's a censure motion. The no confidence is only in the House of Reps, but those are technical terms. If you're the target of one of these, either in the House of Reps or in the House of Councilors, you cannot serve in the next cabinet. You're gone.
Well, how convenient that we've got a cabinet shuffle just probably
a few weeks
days or weeks away.
But it guarantees that he won't be reappointed.
We kind of thought so anyway.
Well, his performance the past few weeks and months has been an embarrassment. And even conservative commentators have said, this guy has got to go. So you have to think there might have been even a little bit of collusion on the part of the opposition. This guy's a goner anyway, so let's do the no.
Maybe we'll collect a couple of votes from the LDP.
Exactly. That it has happened in the past.
No, and it's happened this time too. There were a couple of parties that were not quite in the LDP and not quite in Komeito, kind of floating, and they did come in and vote along the lines of the coalition partners.
Yeah, in this case, we have...
Surprising, actually.
I don't think so, because here's the deal. The Prime Minister and his party, in order to extend this image of we're open to other ideas, open to other parties, invited the Japan Innovation Party to offer its own counter bill, and that would be debated, and they were entirely open to this process. What that means is that we're trying to drive a wedge between the Japan Innovation Party and the DPJ, the main opposition party. That was the plan, but the Japan Innovation Party split up during the course of this process. So there was no deal.
Right.
There was no bill that could be brought as a counter bill. The whole plan fell apart. What they did in the end get were these 3 micro right-wing vanity projects. These tiny parties. The Renaissance Party has a single member,
right?
And that was their broad coalition when the vote in the committee came. I don't know. It's kind of embarrassing, really, that you get you have to go to the freak show rather than to have an actual party.
Well, what do they say? Politics makes strange bedfellows.
Oh, these are strange bedfellows.
Okay.
These are truly marginal parties. If the government claims, in fact, I think the Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga this morning, in fact, said something on the lines of, "We had a multi-party coalition vote for these things." When you have 2 or 3 people from other places, give me a break.
Sure.
But technically, it's true.
Okay, well, part of the theme here is that there is a kind of a movement now, and it'll probably increase towards the upper house election that will be in mid-2016.
Yeah, and it's going to be really very difficult to get a real read on this because a lot of interpreters and commentators on Japan are looking at what happened, and they're somehow saying that this is bad for the DPJ. The DPJ showed that it was unable to stop the process. I have no idea where they're getting this. The DPJ couldn't stop the process a year ago if it tried. They had never had a chance. What happened during these past few months was a dramatic deviation from the smooth executive, we can pass anything, we'll go through the motions, but they are the motions, okay, don't forget it, kind of image that Abe and company wanted to send. Right. That got blown to pieces, and a lot of times they just went right off the road. They got back on again because, of course, it's their road and it's a straight one all the way to passage. Right. But gosh, they've made a real hash of things.
Well, that's what makes this exercise that we're in, Tokyo on Fire, so intriguing and interesting, and I learned a lot from it because politics changes a lot, and it changes every day. And those changes at the political level run rather deep and broad. And so the politics now will shift from the security legislation that the Prime Minister has spent an awful lot of political capital on, and now it should go to the economy. So who knows how that's going to change things, but with regard to the security legislation, we consider that as already knocked up.
It's done. The diet session will end at the scheduled time. The Prime Minister will then use the last day of September and then October for his international jaunts. There's a good time. There's the UN General Assembly is coming up, all of the different meetings that he can attend. And
he's going to Jamaica, man.
That's right. He's going to Jamaica. And he can keep getting more stamps in his passport, which is the most full passport of any prime minister. And that's good for him. It gets him out of the country, gets him away from this issue.
Right.
Now, what's going to happen then is we have an extraordinary diet session. This is the ordinary diet session. It's been extended longer than any other one. But even though we've had this extra time to work on all these bills and pass a lot of them, they're going to have the extraordinary one. Because
within this year, before the end of
within
the year.
this year, and before basically December the 27th. On December the 28th, as we all know, Japan shuts down and gets ready for the new year. And on the 26th, it will be the anniversary of his election as prime minister. So he's going to want to be in town on that day. So I'm looking at the 27th for the extraordinary session to end.
Okay.
And it'll be about a month long. So backtrack that, you're getting to the last week of November. But it's not going to be much more than a month. And it's only going to be considering the compilation of the budget. Nothing really important otherwise is going to get done because they're basically exhausted after this process. It's been a very long 245 days.
Right. And it's not just them who are exhausted. I mean, the politicians who are exhausted. the bureaucrats are exhausted, and the people who are lining up out in front of the Diet are exhausted.
They didn't get to have a summer holiday. Things didn't get to slow down. Nothing slowed down. They're going to need a long break.
Let's talk about the security legislation. There's been a lot of rumor and innuendo that it's going to be troops on the ground and the draft will be reinitiated, or that Japanese soldiers will be in the line of fire and that sort of thing. So one of the arguments was, you cannot touch the Constitution. This is against the Constitution. But really, the bills that have been passed are not changing the Constitution. They're just interpreting differently certain parts of the Constitution with regard to collective self-defense.
Yeah, they're saying that, yes, the Cabinet Legislative Bureau has said that collective security is now constitutional. Previously, it has said that it wasn't. Now, people might not understand it, but that there is a determination in the Japanese Constitution that the only body that is empowered with deciding whether something is constitutional or not is the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And the government does not dispute that. However, as a matter of convenience, basically, the Cabinet Legislative Bureau has pre-checked every bit of legislation before it's ever been submitted for constitutionality so that it would never have to go to the Supreme Court. That was what was changed this time around. Mr. Abe came into office, he put in a brand new person in the Cabinet Legislative Bureau, and whereas the CLB had previously always said in every one of its determinations collective self-defense is unconstitutional, this new guy said, oh, wait, well, actually it is.
Right.
And it's that switch, which is not based on some kind of constitutional power, that has been the entire fight, or that's the fulcrum point. And perhaps people overseas don't understand that. Mm-hmm. They think that it's whether Japan wants to be a peace nation or a war nation. Certainly, there are people who argue, that we are a peace nation and that we should be proud of that and never get involved. But the technical issue has been on the who gets to say what the Constitution says or not.
Right. So to be clear, the bills that have just passed the Diet session today are not changes to the Constitution. They're just reinterpretations of certain components that make up the Article 9.
Yeah, based on the determination of the Cabinet Legislative Bureau. That collective security is okay.
Right. And the decider of whether this is constitutional or not is perhaps the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court can't step in now. This is a political process.
That's right.
What they have to wait for is a real controversy, and then they're put in a position, well, first of all, they have to have an aggrieved party, a party that can represent that violation of what they interpret to be a breach of the law, and bring that to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court can evaluate.
Yeah, and one of the things that people will tell you privately is that they can't imagine who that aggrieved party would be, so that it's the government really wins in the end, because there's really no sense of any kind of repeat of the Sunagawa case, where a group of individuals invaded a U.S. Air Force base, and it came down to the Supreme Court to decide whether or not the presence of United States forces Japan was constitutional or not. And it was their determination that it was, that Japan has the right to choose a means of defending itself. Now, what this particular administration has said is that decision also allows collective security. That's been another huge, again, legal point. So there are two things going on. There are people who like Japan as a peaceful nation that's not involved in international affairs in a military way. Yes, we'll send aid workers. Yes, we'll send lots of aid. But that's been the way we've earned a lot of respect and a lot of affection in the world.
And maybe we'll gas up your tankers.
And a few things, right. We'll do some things. But we'll stay out of it. And then there is an equally sizable group of people who say, the world is a very complicated and dangerous place. Japan itself is in a great deal of pressure, at least feeling a lot of pressure, from states in the region, and we need to keep the United States engaged. We're going to have to do more. Mm-hmm. And there's that fight. But then there's a far broader coalition of people a big number, think that what the Abe administration has done in terms of the handling of the Constitution is beyond the pale.
Right. Well,
by a 2-to-1 margin, easily.
Well, there are a lot of Americans that say, my gosh, Donald Trump, in fact, said, what are they doing getting this free ride for so long? So Japan...
And to which they should say, we had a public hearing here, and 93 people applied to speak, and all 93 were against it.
That's right.
And that really freaked out the government as well. The government attracted not a single person to argue its point. And that was a public hearing with a public invitation. Please come with your arguments. 93 to zip.
Well, that says a lot about a lot of different things. I mean, you don't want to be the person to kind of stick out and champion an unpopular issue, even though you might feel it. But I think on this particular issue, the default is let's stick with the Constitution. Let's continue on with this economic focus that we've had without having to devote resources to defending our country, and we're benefiting from this nuclear umbrella that's provided by the United States, and that seems to be working okay. But we're paying a lot for it too.
And for analysts and looking at Japan, they've been waiting for a new story. Why should I invest in Japan? What's good about what's happening? And this 6-month process of going through the security legislation has basically blinded everyone to anything else, including the government. Its time has been completely absorbed in trying to defend its position. And you hear a lot of people saying, let's get back to Abenomics. The world economy, the various markets in the world are crashing. The values of currencies versus the dollar are crashing. We have all kinds of things that need to be handled. Get off this subject and get back to the real business of business.
Right. Well, geopolitically, there's a lot going on in this region, and without the presence of Japan, I mean, this region. I mean, we talked about TPP. It was the focus of one of our episodes.
What TPP?
TPP, yes.
I don't recall anything called TPP. What is that?
We talked about TPP, and then we talked about the leaking of the United States spying on Japan.
Oh, yes, I recall.
Right.
It's some kind of partnership.
Yes, it's a partnership. It's a closely tied partnership between the United States and Japan.
Seriously, that's how far off the radar it has fallen.
But it's important. The security legislation is important. I think Japan needs to move to identify itself and to take a larger role in world politics.
And many people here in Japan agree with that. It's just the methods that the LDP and Mr. Abe have personally used. Now, to be fair, he doesn't like the Constitution. So that you can't really expect him to really go and be very, very careful and very legalistic about a document that he doesn't like.
Well, there are a lot of people that are like that. The right wing here has a presence. It's a pronounced presence, and there are a lot of people who harken back to the good old days when Japan was an empire and we had our own image of ourselves, and we were projecting our image. I mean, a lot of people have a nostalgia for that.
And certainly the present Constitution prevents a return to Japan's glory.
Right.
And certainly, when he first ran for office, he was constantly harping on the fact that everyone knows that the Constitution of Japan is written by Americans. It was written by Americans over basically a week. The people in the occupation civil division wrote out this new document and presented it to the Japanese side.
Of course, they pulled their hair out because they couldn't get a decision. They had wanted the Japanese to craft their own legislation.
And they'd come back with these little tiny things,
they couldn't
changes.
do it.
They couldn't do the radical change that that the Americans wanted, so the Americans presented them a document that was then translated into sort of ugly Japanese.
If you've been in Japan long enough doing business, you can kind of feel the frustration that probably GSQ was feeling at that point in time.
Yeah, the GHQ was definitely feeling it. And we're going a little bit off topic, but you have to understand that for Mr. Abe, he would constantly use the image of a constitution drawn by our own hands, written by our own hands. And
like that's going to happen?
Well, no, it is. It's going to happen someday. The current document has never been changed.
No, it's unique in the world, isn't it?
It really is a unique situation where it's gone. It's probably going to make it through its 70th anniversary without a change of any kind. Maybe. I think that after that something will be possible. But the current DPJ government, the current DPJ says that they will okay no changes to the Constitution as long as Abe is Prime Minister, and so...
Okay, well, we can wait, though. And it's not always going to be a situation where the LDP needs to rely on a coalition partner.
Well, it doesn't. In this case, the Komeito is basically along with the LDP, and there are elements within the DPJ who are ready for constitutional reform. However, the leadership of the DPJ is dead set against it. Now, that's what makes next year's House of Councillors election so interesting, because the party that's defending seats in the House of Councillors election is not the LDP. The defenders are going to be DPJ. Now, the DPJ has to craft a strategy to hold on to those seats so that it holds on to its influence and prevents the LDP from getting the 2/3 majority in the House of Councillors that will give it the possibility and the capacity to change the Constitution. It doesn't have that now, but we're looking at July 2016 when the election happens.
It's going to be a very exciting race. There's going to be a lot of fisticuffs.
And certainly this strategy of delaying and of portraying themselves as the defenders of the Constitution is a part of the long-term strategy. It doesn't win the DPJ any particular set of votes now. You would probably want to, if you're want to actually win, let's say, a by-election for a seat that's emptied by someone who passes away, you probably need to put together a coalition of various interest groups and pander to them. That's the way that they got into power in 2009 under the direction of the great electoral master Ozawa Ichiro. But instead of that, they're setting themselves up as moral paragons.
Right.
And, well, that makes no sense in the short term. It may pay off big next year, because by that time people may be really sick of the way that
especially in light of the way things happened last night and the portrayal of that and the return to arrogance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the national broadcaster even seemed to have switched sides during this, in that the NHK, the national broadcaster, has been very wary of trying to promote or even cover the protests or the actions of the opposition parties as anything more than just a sideshow.
Right.
Instead, during this last few days, the sideshow has been the supporters. They did very, very craftily and very dramatically. They contrasted the pro-legislation rally versus the demonstrations. And the rally they went in front of Shinjuku, the world's busiest station, right? And they could get together 5, 6, 7 onlookers to get together and cheer, "Save Japan! Yay! Preserve Japan! Yay!" And it was, and the national broadcaster broadcast that, and then would go to the protests in front and show the thousands of people there pounding on drums and singing and all this stuff that they do there and waving the flags and all.
Well, listen, it was really impressive. There's a typhoon that is approaching. One just left last week. Tremendous rain last night.
And
Tokyo
they stayed through it all.
They stayed through it all. Past midnight, the trains closed down. It was very impressive.
Well, they were the Diet was still in session. The Diet members were still struggling. And the protesters were out there. It was democracy in action. And Japan is a liberal democracy, and it has a vibrant protest and opposition facet to it. Of course, all kinds of institutionalized unfairnesses exist. Primarily the unfairness in terms of the disparity in the weight of votes in the House of Representatives between rural and urban areas. Urban areas with their large populations are short-changed, and rural areas are way overrepresented. It's not the only.
Sometimes 2 to 1.
Yeah, 2 to 1. so that a person living in the city is a half a person, whereas a person living in the country is a full citizen.
Right.
Yeah, that exists, and that's institutionalized, and it causes all kinds of trouble. But nevertheless, this is a vibrant environment, and this process, rather than being demoralizing, has really energized a lot of people.
Well, not only is it vibrant, but you don't see police with truncheons. There are no water cannons.
Though there are a lot of police, 6,000 surrounded surrounded the Diet. 6,000. They're really concerned.
Yes, but they're polite, and I mean, there is a show of force. But I mean, the interaction between the police and the protesters. I mean, there was a little bit of
Well, it's not like
wrestling.
the police can smile at them or anything.
Right.
That's probably against regulations.
But they do apologize, right?
Yes. Yeah. Excuse me.
Right.
Excuse me. I'm going to now beat you.
Yes.
but very, very gently, and that it's true. They are quite polite, but mostly they are stone-faced. So
Yes.
it does have again a visual impact with the stone-faced police facing off against
16, 17-year-olds.
16 and 17-year-olds, and behind them a whole bunch of grandmas and grandpas.
Right.
It looks really funny.
Listen, before we get too far afield, let's just talk for those people who might not know about what this new legislation allows Japan to do that it was unable to do before. And it's not a whole lot, but it is very impactful with regard to, putting Japanese citizens, Japanese troops, in the potential line of fire.
Basically, it does four things. There are actually quite a number of scenarios in which it comes into play. But basically, the concept is if other countries' ships are helping an evacuation, including Japanese citizens, a Japanese self-defense forces weapon system, either a plane or a ship, can fire on someone who attacks these people who are trying to escape via this third country's vessel or whatever transport it may be. That before they didn't have that capacity because there was not an attack on Japanese forces.
Right.
Therefore, there was no ability to return fire, or in this case, initiate fire.
There would be
they have that ability.
Right.
They have an ability now in terms of a UN peacekeeping force to participate in the defense of someone who is being attacked, who is another country's troops that are part of the same PKO. They can now go to the aid of them in terms of defending them against a party that is not attacking the Japanese forces.
Right. And importantly, it's not geographically restricted to the Asia-Pacific region or the waters surrounding Japan.
And then some technical issues were also cleared up. And these are really piddling. The one is that if there is ever a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz,
right,
using sea mines, can Japanese demining vessels, and Japanese are among the finest deminers in the world, can they go, even while, if a shooting war is going on, can they go and demine that region? And this legislation says, yes, they can. Whereas previously, all determinations have been no, the shooting has to stop, there has to be a ceasefire, there has to be some kind of negotiations going on, and then Japanese self-defense forces can go and clear the mines. Mm-hmm. The other issue is having to do with missile defense, where a Japanese Aegis destroyer, which has the SM-3 anti-missile missile loaded on it, along with its amazing ability to see objects in the sky, it spots, for example, a launch of a very large rocket. We don't know if it's a missile or just a rocket from out of a site in North Korea that's going to go way over Japan. No way the thing could hit Japan. Mm-hmm. It's going to pass over. So Japan is not under attack. The determination under this new legislation is that with a good chance that this high altitude trajectory is going to lead to a splashdown either near or on U.S. territory, the self-defense forces can shoot down that missile while it's on the ascent. Mm-hmm. And while they can still get it with their SM-3 system, even though it's not going to hit Japan. That was always a piddling point that the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs used to just harp on in terms of this legislation. Everybody knew, on a basic sense, that if a missile were launched in the direction of the United States and Japan didn't shoot it down, the alliance was over.
Right.
So that any ship captain knew that whatever the law says, he has the right to shoot it down. It doesn't matter, because the alliance and Japan's total security is on the line. But this was a technical point, and the Defense Ministry and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have long used it to dig away at the arguments of, well, in this case, the DPJ, but opposition forces to any kind of changes in the law.
Some of the developments that are going on now in North Korea are that their missile capabilities and their throw weight capabilities have really
and the ability to put a nuclear weapon on top of that missile are all advancing. Yeah.
So apparently, the United States and Japan saw this coming as a general evolution that is inescapable, and probably the security legislation is just the right time.
Yeah, but they used it as a crowbar to get other things, and it was for a point that everybody knew was absurd.
Right.
That there was never any chance, and indeed during this debate, the head of the DPJ, Mr. Okada, point blank asked Mr. Abe, "Okay, there's a ship leaving some country or peninsula or something nearby, which is evacuating, and it has on it a Japanese woman and her baby." Okay, they always use this imagery, both the ruling party and the ministries, of a Japanese woman and her baby evacuating on another country's vessel from some conflict, and suddenly that vessel is attacked, and there's an SDF destroyer right next to it. And under the law, the SDF destroyer cannot save anyone. Okada point blank asked Mr. Abe, "Now, if we had this situation and there was an SDF destroyer, are you telling me that you would not give the order to attack that force that's attacking that vessel? Are you seriously telling me that you will respect the constitutional injunction at that point, given a real situation?" And blah, 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 was Abe's response. He didn't expect that question, because we're dealing with things and scenarios that are obvious.
Right.
If in a real world situation, the captain of the ship would take upon his own authority the ability to defend.
Right, and maybe deal with the consequences
later
on his own accord.
On his own accord, accept court-martial, accept whatever, right? For having done the right thing. And particularly in the Navy, they have that tradition, pre-war as well. In the fall of Smyrna, under Turkish forces, the only ships that took refugees, Greek refugees who were trying to flee from the Turkish forces, were Japanese Navy vessels. Every other country's Navy had its vessels in the port, and they watch the city burn and all the people get massacred.
Right.
Only the Japanese made that choice and said, "We don't care what the rules are. These people need to be helped."
Well,
and so there's a tradition there.
Sure, and it is another diversion, but what a great decision that was. The relations between that country and Japan have been very rich and mutually beneficial.
Yeah, in this
since.
case, it went against that tradition because it wasn't the Turks, they were Greeks they were saving. But it was just that they didn't even think about the long-term strategic implications. Simply there were civilians who were in grave danger, and they saved them. So they have this tradition of doing the right thing. They also have other traditions of not doing such the right thing, which is probably what the Chinese and Korean governments are going to be talking about now the legislation has passed.
You know, it's interesting when we reflect on Tokyo on Fire. Our very first podcast was on security legislation.
The first one that we recorded, yeah.
And that was 26 episodes ago.
Yeah.
And since then, we have had more than 10,000 individual visitors to Tokyo on Fire who have watched one of these episodes, and the numbers just continue to grow. And it's just interesting. I don't know if we'll have another episode that focuses on the security legislation.
Well, not for another 6 months.
Maybe not. Right.
Yeah, but still, it's great that these things are available and that we've been able to talk about them, and that I really hope we have a chance in 6 months' time to see how this is all played out. And it will be, of course, getting it running into the run-up for the election.
Right. So just to wrap things up, the Diet will be in session now for probably another week or so. We'll go on vacation. We'll come back. They will close up the Diet. Probably have an extended session. It will close up at the end of this year.
Extraordinary session.
Right. Have an extraordinary session.
Yeah. But this is going to be very perfunctory. It's not going to be like in previous years where it's been several months to pass big legislation. It's just to do some basic housekeeping.
We've only got 2 months left.
Yeah, right. It's only a very, very short amount of time, so it's not going to be long. And then in the new year, sometime in January, maybe even under February, it depends on when they want to start, they'll start the regular session.
Right. They'll start the regular session. The emperor comes out of the palace and opens the new Diet session.
It's his constitutional duty.
That's right.
And he does that, and we'll be on our way for the next year.
Any predictions going forward, Michael, before we wrap this up?
Any predictions would be kind of hard. It's been a very, very rough ride, but we saw the cabinet have a really significant fall in its popularity, and people were really wondering whether Abe would even be reelected. There was a thought that there might be a dark horse candidate who might come out and try to challenge him.
That came and went.
That came and went. He's in an extremely strong position. There was not even a vote. No one came out to even try to challenge him. And at that point, we're seeing someone who's probably going to go for the next 3 years.
Right. So a cabinet reshuffle is imminent. And don't you think that this one is going to be really focused on...
It's going to be big.
And it's going to be focused on the economic underpinnings of getting this country back on track.
And there's nothing else that they need to do in terms of the security legislation. It's eaten up a lot of time. They want to move on. And they know that they've not sold Abenomics and that people don't see a story there.
Right.
And until they figure out some way of selling something new, other than simply having the Bank of Japan do another round of monetary easing, it's going to be very tough for people to say Japan is back.
Thank you, Michael. Great comment. And with that, I think I'd like to wrap up today's Tokyo on Fire. You've been watching episode 26. Our burning issue today has been the security legislation. It is being punched through the Diet process right now as we speak. We really appreciate you watching this podcast and providing comments and recommendations to us. As you know, you can post your comments to us via email at comments@tokyoonfire.com. Alternatively, you can reach us at Twitter via #TokyoOnFire. Probably the best way to interact with us is just putting your comments into the dialog box on YouTube. And finally, you can download this podcast on iTunes. Once again, thank you very much for watching. My name is Timothy Langley. See you next week.